What is going on, everybody? I am back today to talk about a new documentary series that was just released on HBO Max a couple of nights ago. And I saw some people posting about this on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. And I saw that it was centered around Nickelodeon and Nickelodeon in the 90s and early 2000s specifically. And I was born in 1990. I grew up in the 90s, and Nickelodeon was a huge part of my life. And over the past several years, especially with the ramping up of the Me Too movement, there have been a lot of things exposed about Nickelodeon in that time period, especially when Dan Schneider was the creator and showrunner of some of their most popular programs. And seeing some of the information that had been revealed about what was going on in that time period, it's incredibly disturbing and it's upsetting to think that, something you were watching as a kid where you don't really have the level of perception to see things in the way like this documentary is uncovering. But as you grow into an adult and you see these things, it's just truly horrifying. And so as soon as I heard about this, I really wanted to take the time to watch it because of how big of a part of my life Nickelodeon was at that period in time. And the documentary series I'm going to be discussing today with you is Quiet on Set. Quiet on Set: The Dark Side of Kids TV is directed by Mary Robertson and Emma Schwartz. Discover the untold story of the toxic and abusive environment inside 90s kids TV. Hear harrowing accounts from former child stars and crew who probe the balance of power in the industry and reveal an era that inflicted lasting wounds still felt today. So, as I said, I was very much looking forward to watching this because I think that, when we're looking back on the history of film or just the state of Hollywood and the filmmaking industry in general, it is really important to call out past failures and see where issues have happened so that the industry can clean it up and take care of their people. And what I will say, this documentary does not have a perfect structure. Some of the editing's a little all over the place. I feel like some of the stories don't necessarily align with the overall theme and where the documentary is going by the fourth episode. But despite the flaws that the documentary has, I think that the subject matter and what the documentary is trying to say is so incredibly important and harrowing and horrifying that I'm glad that it exists, because I think this exposes a lot of issues, not just looking at this era of television in the 90s, but just the Hollywood machine as a whole. And I just want to preface this by saying, I went to school for filmmaking, film production in general. And so a lot of people don't realize that when you're working on a movie or you're working on a television show, you're working 9 to 11 to 12-hour days with very little breaks in between. People are essentially ran into the ground working on these TV series and these movies. And the conditions are already extreme, and then you're in an environment where it's so difficult to get into this industry and to be a part of this industry that the fear instilled in people and the worry of being blacklisted from the industry for speaking out is horrifying. Unrelated to this topic, but I watched a documentary while I was in film school about a production that was going on where they were working 12 to 15-hour days, and the closest hotel that they would provide for the cast and crew was an hour and a half away from set. And one of the crew members died trying to drive to the hotel room and falling asleep at the wheel. And so, for someone like me who knows a lot of insight into the industry, watching something like this that is giving so many of the horrors and the atrocities committed against these kids at this time period and the writers and people involved in the project, it was really eye-opening, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of it today. So as the plot description states, this documentary takes place from the early beginnings of Dan Schneider's career with Nickelodeon in the 90s all the way to like the early 2000s and to like 2005, 2006, at the height of Nickelodeon's success. And we're introduced to cast members from all that, from The Amanda Show, from Zoe 101, Drake and Josh, all of these different shows that were when Nickelodeon was at its peak. and they're discussing situations on set, and we get information about not only Dan Schneider and the way that he treated the people that he worked with, but also additional members on the cast and crew that committed some absolutely atrocious and despicable actions while they were working on these sets. And it's incredibly eye-opening. There's a series of interviews with these two female writers who worked on the Amanda Show, who Dan Schneider forced them to share a salary, which was completely illegal at the time, and treated them horrible, and essentially said like women aren't funny, and he didn't find women funny at all, and made them do some really abysmal and awful things while they were working on this show. And then you're also hearing accounts from the kids on all that in the Amanda Show in this time period, and how Dan essentially viewed himself as a godlike figure, and that, you know, the success of this show was because of him and the things that he did. And some of the things that he just asked of these people, it was horrifying. I mean, honestly, to think that someone not only is running this television show, but it's kids, like it's children, and you're treating children this way. And this has been exposed over the past several years, but some of the content in these shows and how explicitly sexual that it is for a lot of times kids that were 11, 12, even younger, doing this on live television. And it's really interesting because I've watched a lot of documentaries about serial killers over the years, and how there are a lot of serial killers who not only get a thrill out of killing, but also get a thrill out of, you know, toying with the police and seeing how close they can get to being caught. And while Dan Schneider is not murdering people, and he has not been accused of like assault or anything towards people, he has created an incredibly toxic work environment and hired people who were abusers and abusers of children, which we learn about more in the documentary, and how the themes and the things that he includes in his show, it's almost like, I'm in charge of this network, I am so incredibly powerful, let's see how much I can get away with. And it's almost like he's toying with not only the company but with the viewer, as to like, I'm showing this to your kids and I'm getting away with it. And as a child, when you'd watch it, some of the extreme stuff that you would see, and you'll see examples of it if you watch the documentary, as a kid you're just like, oh, that's kind of absurd, but it's funny because you're a child and your brain doesn't go in the direction of seeing sexual innuendo, especially at a young age. But as an adult, looking back, I was watching all these segments of a show that I watched a ton when I was a kid, and just being like, this is disgusting. Like, it is insane that he was taking these minors and putting them in situations that are that explicitly sexual. And it's really disturbing to watch it and to know that that is what happened. And there's other things that aren't even included in the documentary if you research about things Dan Schneider tweeted out and things that he did that just feel really uncomfortable. And Dan has never been accused of like assault of a minor or engaging in sex acts with kids or anything of that nature. But a lot of the environment that he creates and kind of the ownership that he has over these people, it is so disturbing, and it's really uncomfortable. And so watching this really was eye-opening. And like I said early in the review, you know, this is a larger issue with Hollywood as a whole, because there aren't enough regulations, and it's an industry that's so difficult to get into. And so much of this, you'd see interviews with parents. A big segment, which I won't get too much into because it's a big part of the documentary, involves Drake Bell and his father, who was one of the faces of Nickelodeon at this time with Drake and Josh. And to see the kind of things that he did for his son as a form of protection that the studios were not doing, and that people involved with Nickelodeon weren't doing, and like seeing those women in the writers room and how there was no one in like an HR department or anyone taking care of them, or when there were abusers and child abusers that were on the cast, how the kids were taken into a separate room when they were questioned away from their parents. And just hearing those things, you know, and hearing testaments from these parents saying like, well, this is what my kids wanted. They wanted to be in this industry, and I was scared to death to speak out in fear that they would never be able to be in the industry again. And there is something so deeply wrong with that. It is so problematic and it is so terrible that you get a job in this career field and you're afraid that even to speak up for your own safety, that you may never be able to be involved in that career path again. It's really messed up, and it's something that needs to be changed. And I still see today directors on big films that have been accused of abusing people and treating them terribly, and people still go after them and want to work with them. And there's something so genuinely unsettling about that, and how there's not more regulation. And then thinking about how this is all dealing with children and some of the abuse that these children experienced, and like how many sickos that they were working next to in their work environment. It's just, it makes your skin crawl. And like I said, I just found this to be deeply impactful and moving in a way that's like, hey, people need to speak out about this stuff, and this industry needs to change its standards and really take care of its people and have some form of regulation so stuff like this does not happen. And I think despite the documentary's flaws, as I said at the beginning, some of the stories feel a little out of place. Some of the editing isn't perfect, and some of the people that they interview don't necessarily have as much insight. But I do think what the documentary is trying to say as a whole is incredibly important. And I'm glad that something like this exists that was willing to expose a lot of the horrors and the evils that these kids had to experience in the 90s. So if you've seen Quiet on Set, did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I thought this documentary was really unsettling, but it's saying something incredibly poignant and important, and I'm glad that it exists. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and looking forward to get more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.